has served as the White House chief strategist for the first 7 months of President Donald Trump's first administration. He's now the host of the Conservative War Room podcast. He is also a man that has been on the record on several occasions endorsing circumventing the 22nd Amendment for Donald Trump to receive a third term in office, okay? That is why I wanted to talk to my next guest. Mr. Steve Bannon is on the show with yours truly. How are you, sir? How's everything? Thank you for being on.
Doing fine, Stephen A. Thanks for having me. Honored.
Now, explain to me, Steve Bannon, how you can, with a straight face, sit back and say Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated as the president of the United States in January of 2029. He's going to win the election in 2028 when the 22nd Amendment clearly states no one shall serve more than 2 terms. Could you talk about that, please?
The Constitution says, Stephen, that on President Trump's Article 2 powers, that he's chief executive officer of the U.S. government, he's commander-in-chief of the armed forces, he's chief law enforcement officer of the United States government, chief magistrate. And I think, as I count coming on your show, I think there's 150 lawsuits in federal court by various organizations affiliated with the Democratic Party, the NGOs, who are actually members of the Democratic Party, suing President Trump on his Article 2 powers that are clearly delineated in the Constitution. So the Constitution is open for interpretation. I have never said, and the people I'm working with have never said, we're trying to amend the Constitution. We think that there are a number of legal workarounds of that, and we're working on that, and we'll probably present it to the public sometime either right before the 22 midterms or shortly thereafter, when most people will be jumping in the race for the 2028 nominations for their parties. And so this is something I'm absolutely convinced of. And I tell folks, I said, look, when I first I'd known Trump for a couple of years, but when I first start watching him as a politician act, and really as early as May of 2014, when I saw him go to these cattle calls in Iowa and in New Hampshire. And I told people, I was running Breitbart at the time, and I told people, I said, that guy's going to win the Republican primary and he's going to be the next president of the United States. People laughed in my face, and he was polling at 0. In fact, he polled at 0 up for the next year, all the way up right before he ran. He was still in distant 7th or 8th place before he announced that day on January 2015, which will come up the 10-year anniversary. In 2021, when he had the second election stolen, he went back to Mar-a-Lago. The odds were long there. People laughed in my face. Fox News did not show him live for 2 years. So I tell folks, I say, folks, I have had Trump's back and been involved with people early on when the odds were so much longer than we have now of actually working through different alternatives to make sure he's on the ballot, and he will be elected president of the United States. And on the 20th of January in the afternoon of 2029, President Trump will be in the White House as serving his, winning his 4th election and serving his 3rd term.
I'm doing this for my sole enjoyment, this clip that I'm about to bring up, because I watch Bill Maher's show all the time, Real Time with Bill Maher. I loved seeing you on there last week. I love seeing what he had to say in the aftermath of his visit to the White House to meet with Trump. But this is you and him interacting with one another about this very subject. I'll ask my next question after I show this to you again. Take it away, guys.
Here it is, the Constitution. Can I read a passage to you? Amendment 22, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. And yet you keep talking about Trump's maybe you should have this. Here,
I'll get you to sign it backstage and underline. Look, President Trump didn't bring up running for a 3rd term. Myself and others brought up running for a 3rd term. President Trump is going to run for a 3rd term, and President Trump is going to be elected again on the afternoon of January 20th of 2029. He's going to be president of the United States.
Why did I bring that up, Steve Bannon? I'm going to tell you why. Because the key thing that I peeled from that was you saying that President Trump didn't say this. He didn't ask for this. You guys were the ones that initiated it. What is this fixation on him? I see J.D. Vance as the vice president of the United States. Last time I checked, he probably governed the same way Trump is governing. We see Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State, who's been a senator for quite some time. He knows what the hell he's doing. There's a plethora of other individuals within the GOP that could definitely fill those shoes. What's the fixation on Donald Trump, sir?
Stephen, look, there's a lot of good folks out there that could be president and do an okay job. But if an individual like Trump, let's be specific about this. When he had the election stolen from him in 2020 and went back to Mar-a-Lago, and he made that decision, those really dark days of January, February, and March, he understood that if he was to come back and not just sit in Mar-a-Lago and buy more golf courses and get in the Open Rota in the United Kingdom, or get some of his courses in the PGA tournaments and the U.S. Open Rota here in the United States, and enjoy a big book deal and hang out with Melania and the family, he understood at the time that if he came back and ran for president again, not just the Republican establishment, but that the apparatus would try to put him in prison. The apparatus would try to bankrupt him. The apparatus would eventually try to assassinate him. He made it's the most courageous political move in the history of this country. If you take John Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, you read it and add it all up and triple it, that's 1/10 of the moral clarity and courage that President Trump had to say, I'm going to come back, because if I don't come back and do this and win and take the country back and get it back on the constitutional republic we should be, understanding what happened and then looking what happened in the 4 years, the country's finished. This is why President Trump, most countries don't have someone like Trump in their entire history. We've been very fortunate to have General Washington at the founding of the nation, President Lincoln at the rebirth of the nation, and now President Trump at the rejuvenation of this country. And that's why a man like that comes along every 100 years, and we got to get all the squeeze out of the lemon. We have to have this guy's back. We want him there as long as possible, and we're going to find legal methods to do it. And President Trump will be reelected and be back in the Oval Office.
Now, Steve Bannon, I'm not going to be some leftist constantly, just drilling in this point, but you do know everyone says, excuse me, the election wasn't stolen, that you lost fair and square in 2020. The inordinate amount of lawsuits that were thrown out there, even the courts dismissed it, etc. Yet guys like yourself and others continue to say the election was stolen when others would argue that the facts say otherwise. Do you ever think about letting that go, particularly now that the man is back in office as the 47th president, and to avoid spewing such rhetoric, knowing that it just serves to continue to divide the country? What about that notion?
I actually think it brings the country together. Stephen A., the other day, President Trump signed an executive order about Krebs, about a guy that he appointed that was at DHS that said it was the most secure, cyber-secured election in history. He actually initiated an investigation. There's Tulsi Gabbard, who is a Democrat, right, head of DNI, director of national intelligence, said that they now have a beginning of proof that the machines can be hacked. And I'm not a machine guy. I say they stole it the old-fashioned way, particularly in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania with mail-in ballots. But over 70% of the Republican Party believes the 2020 election was stolen. So I think right now, of all Americans, I think it's about 43 to 44, almost 45%. So a vast minority of your fellow countrymen believe that the 2020 election was stolen. And then a whole raft of people think there was something up. I have been adamant from day one. We have to have a congressional investigation, open hearings about get to the bottom of 2020, and let the cards fall where they may. But it's not over. You cannot have something that's questioned in a constitutional republic. And I am adamant that we have to investigate. Now I see that Tulsi Gabbard and President Trump signed an executive order. You're going to have a formal investigation of this, and I'm sure we're going to go over the next couple of years and get it on the table. But for the MAGA believers and the MAGA faith, it is an article of faith through our knowledge of doing this and drilling down those numbers that the 2020 election was stolen. President Trump would have never run again. If he actually thought he had lost, he would never run again. He says time and again, he ran for the simple reason he knew the 2020 election was stolen and he had to come back and right that wrong. This is why we call him, he's like the Roman general Cincinnatus, who retired and went back to his farm and returned at the request of the people to basically save Rome from invading armies. That's how we think. We think of President Trump as the American Cincinnatus.
I got a couple of more questions to ask you, and I'll be right back. I don't want the audience to go anywhere, but I got a couple of questions that I got to ask you before I let you get on out of here. I'll be back after I pay these bills. All right, folks, I need you all to stop what you're doing and listen up, okay? Earlier this week, I gave you my picks for Saturday's game between my beloved New York Knicks and the Detroit Pistons. Here's where I picked, okay? More for Jalen Brunson, more for Cade Cunningham, more for Karl Anthony Towns, more for Tobias Harris, more for Mikal Bridges, more for Malik Beasley. I know it's crazy, but damn it, I went more. And I believe I'm going to be right because I believe it's going to be a high-scoring game because the Knicks don't play defense the way that they used to. But that's a different subject for another day. Well, listen, here's the bottom line. If you haven't done so already, go to Prize Picks app and check out the Stephen A. Smith Show community play. It's boosted 15%. The app is easy to use. Just pick more or less on a few player stats, and you can win up to 2,000 times your cash on a single lineup. Best of all, Prize Picks will give you $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. Win or lose, you'll get $50 for playing. Use promo code SAS and download the app now. Again, download the app and use code SAS to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, hey, run your game. Joining me today to talk about the Prize Picks community play is streamer and Prize Picks partner, the one and only Sketch. What's going on, man? First time on the show. How you doing, buddy? How's everything?
Doing great, brother. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I would also like to say I love Prize Picks too. And from what you were saying about your lineup, you must love them too, because what you're doing is just donating money to Prize Picks. A lot of more
That's
there.
Right.
That looks
I think
great.
so. I think so, but you know what? I might be right on a few of them. I'm telling you, I might be right on a few of them. Let's get to the first order of business, Sketch. I hear you're a fan of all the Houston sports teams. What are your picks for Sunday's Houston Rockets game?
Jalen Green, more than it's 3.5 assists. I like Jalen Green more than 3.5 assists. My reasoning why, I don't know if you know, that day is 420. That's a day of passing. Okay, and there's gonna be a lot of passing in that game. In Houston, we love to pass. Jabari Smith Jr. is my next guy, and I will take him more than 9.5 points. Why? Because that number is so low, it makes me angry. It makes me angry, and I'm telling you this: I would push it up and make it a demon if it was 14.5. I would almost take 20.
Okay,
that's my second guy. My third guy, I have Gary Payton Jr. Again, 420. I don't know if you ever smoked some Gary Payton. It is quite literally some of the best stuff you can find. And I'm going with Junior on this one, and it's going to be more 4.5 rebounds and assists. Okay, that's my third guy, and then my other guy is Stephen Curry, 24.5 points. I am from Houston, and he is our kryptonite, so I am expecting him to have a field day. So that's my reasoning.
All right.
And if you want to win money, you should actually throw it to you. You should probably throw some on mine.
It sounds crazy. But you might win. I get it. So I'm going to flow with you on this one. Let me go to the next question because you had a unique opportunity to announce, the 4th round pick at last year's NFL draft for the Texans, Mr. Cade Stover. How was that experience? Talk to me about that.
That was awesome. I think my favorite part about it was being in Detroit. And announcing an Ohio State guy, did not realize until the moment when I heard the boos. I forgot about where I was. The other part was, it was cool because I'm a CJ Stroud fan, and Stover's at ex-CJ Stroud, or was CJ Stroud's teammate at Ohio State. So that was kind of cool. It was kind of all that. And they traded a pick before. So I had a lot to read. They had a whole paragraph. It was dope though. I got the crowd fired up.
You did, and you should have. And listen, I wish they had had a better season, but it still wasn't awful. And by the way, speaking of the Houston, I'm gonna get to the Houston Texans. Speaking of the Houston Texans, a few of the Texans players, including quarterback C.J. Stroud and of course linebacker Will Anderson. How do you think they'll do this upcoming season?
I think they'll do great. CJ, a lot of you are saying he took.
What's great, Sketch?
Great is the AFC Championship game the least. I've already bought the tickets and flights, non-refundable. I usually fly first class. I bought economy this time just because it was non-refundable. I'm going to be there. Rain, and he's going to throw for 300 yards, and I'm looking for a possible MVP. And Will Anderson, I will say, that was one of my favorite picks of the Texans. When we traded up for Will Anderson, that was, we are going to win now. And we are going to shock the world, and we are going to win this year, okay? And I don't want to be that guy, so I am knocking on wood for my city.
A lot of emotion there, but I'm gonna let it slide. Because CJ Stroud's a stud, and I got love for him.
What do you think? What do you think about CJ Stroud? What do you think about CJ Stroud?
I think he's a stud. I just think you got to protect him better. But I think he's a quarterback of the future. He's one of the elite quarterbacks in the future. And I think he's going to deliver a championship to Houston one day. I just don't think it's going to be in the immediate future because I think Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson will probably grab a title before him.
I don't think so about that. Have you seen Josh Allen play football IRL? It is quite literally, I don't know. Every time I've seen him play Houston, he gets his ass kicked. Okay, sorry for cussing. I forgot about that.
Oh, you need to stop that. You need to stop that. That wasn't him. That wasn't him. I mean, he did his job.
I'll give you 10 gifted.
Okay.
10 gifted subs.
Sketch, I got to get ready to run, but not before I ask you this last question. We'll talk about this later because I don't like your take on Josh Allen at all. But before we get on out of here, tell me about the Sidemen charity match at Wembley Stadium in London because you were involved in that. Tell me about that.
It's just something I do. Mr. Smith, to be honest, that's what I do. I am a winner. All I do is win. I broke my trophy, but I do have this other trophy. So I know what I'm talking about most of the time. You see that? It says Sports Streamer of the Year. They only give out one of those. That's like MVP. But this charity match, I don't know. Look up the highlights. Lots of highlights. I'll tell you what. It's like I was walking around England like I was Tom Cruise or something. Schools of children were stopping me, asking me, and telling me, great football game in a different country. Love you, bro. Thanks, bro. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man. Take care.
Have a good one.
You know what? I'm so fascinated to talk to you. I could talk to you for hours. I ain't gonna lie, because some of the stuff that you say, I was like, I cannot believe this man really, really feels this way and is this adamant about it. But I respect the conviction. But I'm gonna switch to something else because I want to get more into you, Steve Bannon. For example, you appeared to have Donald Trump's ear during his first term, but he now seems to be listening to what some would describe as oligarchs or the elites, as you called them. How often do you talk to President Trump right now, and what role do you currently play in the Trump administration?
Look, it's simple. I have a podcast, a show that we've had now going on for 5 years. We started at the beginning of the impeachment when nobody on the right wing or conservative media took the impeachment seriously. When Nancy Pelosi stepped to the microphone, I think it was up at the United Nations, and said she was forming a committee to investigate potential impeachment over the call with Zelensky, I said right away, which I'd been preaching since before 2018, if you lose the House, they will impeach Trump. Just like Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats right now are going to raise $2 billion. The moment they take the House, if they do in 2026, the first order of business in early January 27 is to begin impeachment process of President Trump. The ruling class of this nation know they must destroy Trump and destroy Trump's populist nationalist a movement. So it's my show is just the show. We have various experts on and people, and Scott Bessent, Secretary of Treasury, was a contributor for a couple of years. Peter Navarro is one of my co-hosts, right? Mike Davis, the Viceroy, the one that has such a big voice, particularly bringing Facebook to trial at under the Justice Department and FTC today. He's a prominent member. So we have all the top hardcore, and I mean hardcore MAGA members, people who are, quite frankly, we are farther to the right than President Trump. This platform has led us to have a vanguard of citizens. Well, the reason our show is different, we are the show for the activists. We're not a general audience like Fox or just sitting there changing the channels. We have an activist base. These are the people that make the phone calls. These are the people that took over the Republican Party by the precinct strategy. We believe in one simple thing, human agency. It is your effort and your will that will change this, but you as an individual, and that's what the show is. And President Trump sees clips of it, and he knows that we're backing his policies and we're backing him every day. Although we disagree on certain implementations of the policies, he understands the war room's always there, and that's why I think we've become quite powerful in the MAGA movement.
Well, you're talking about what the left allegedly has done, what you guys believe that he has done, they have done. You talk about you and your show and the movement essentially being activist, being rife with activists. That's the approach that you have. I get that. So what about the question that one would pose to you in terms of what are you willing to do? What lines are you willing to cross? If you assume that the left has done these things, if you assume that they've stolen an election, what about when people look at you all and they say, is there any lines that you won't cross? Because as we see things unfolding before our very eyes, just the other day with the immigrant that was sent back to El Salvador, he wasn't an American citizen, but the court specifically said about Abrego, I believe that's his name. They said to him, hey, he's to be protected here. The Supreme Court voted 9-0 to keep him here. And that he was gone, and the Trump administration said, hey, we can't get him back. When we see stuff like this in the United States of America, we're not accustomed to seeing an administration essentially ignore the Supreme Court, particularly when they vote unanimously. Are these the kind of things that you would endorse and support happening?
I absolutely endorse it. Let's go back for a second on when people talk about breaking rules, things like that. We're the biggest believers in democracy. We just won a sweeping victory in November against all odds. Remember, in 2016, where I stepped in and ran the campaign starting in mid-August when he was 10 or 12 points behind in 2016, we came out of nowhere to beat Clinton. Quite frankly, as people know, a lot of people say Clinton lost more than we won because she was so arrogant about going to Michigan, about going to Flint, Michigan, about going to Detroit, about going to Wisconsin, about going to working class Pennsylvania. We pierced the blue wall because we went there and did rallies, and President Trump convinced working class Democrats and independents to vote for him. So we won that in 2016 that way. In 2024, 4 years they came after Trump. They threatened to put him in jail, to bankrupt him, to do everything, right? They saw us coming, and still President Trump won a sweeping victory, including the popular vote against all odds, as you so well know. And so we're a huge believer in democracy. The reason is we're seeing in front of us a 1932 type reorganization, just like FDR led his coalition. Right now, we have more young black men voting for President Trump than ever. We have Hispanics. Why? Because he's reaching out to working class people. We're populist economic nationalists. And that message is resonating. I tell you, from my time in prison, I only put out one statement. It was in late September. And I said, Trump's going to win. And in the third week of September, I said he's going to win. I said, I could tell that from being in a prison. I was teaching civics there, and my students, young African-American and Hispanic men in jail, under mass incarceration for nonviolent drug dealing on these ghost drugs, that there were 10 and 15 and 25-year sentences, are sitting there talking about their families, and they, to a person, hated the Democratic Party. Hated the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party has lied to us. The Democratic Party has misled us. The Democratic Party has destroyed our families and destroyed the basic economics, right? Because they're globalists. It was incredibly powerful. And that's what President Trump represents. So when you get, this is what I was trying to tell Bill Maher the other night when he handed me the Constitution. I said, look, in the unitary theory of the executive, that Trump is the chief executive officer. He is the commander in chief of the armed forces. He is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States government. That's laid out in Article 2, and it couldn't be plainer. And we have 150 lawsuits. And what the Supreme Court, this whole thing started to try to come between President Trump, his duties and responsibilities as the commander in chief of the armed forces. Now, Stephen A. Smith, let me posit to you that if you ever got serious about this and actually ran for president of the United States, and one of the most important powers you have is commander in chief of the armed forces, would you ever, and you swear an oath to God to uphold that, would you let the Supreme Court, any judiciary, come between you and what you've sworn to high heaven that you will protect the Constitution of the American people as being commander in chief? The answer would be no. You would put your obligation as commander in chief first, and that's what Donald Trump's done.
But I would put my obligation as commander in chief first, Steve Bannon, to upholding the laws of this nation and what the Constitution dictates as well. That would play a role. I wouldn't debunk it. I wouldn't shove it aside. I wouldn't say to hell with all of that, because I took this oath before God. So as a result, me being the commander in chief of this nation ignores the foundational things that this country was founded on and is upheld by. I wouldn't do that as a way to, for example, when we talk about the tariffs, for example, I'm just switching gears just to make my point. When we talk about the tariffs for a second, I don't disagree with Donald Trump about we need to fight China and that we've been hosed and we've been taken advantage of. But I did disagree with how he went about it because I felt he was alienating a bunch of allies when in fact the target was China. So go after China. By going after everybody, you're turning allies against us potentially, turning them into allies for China potentially. And that was something that concerned me. I'm only making that point to say you can agree with something or you can disagree with something, but under the tenets of the laws that govern our society, as long as you play by those rules, we're all safe because you're not scaring the living hell out of the American people. You guys don't seem to do that sometimes. And let me say this to you. You brought up African Americans and Hispanics when you were talking about, a voting bloc that Trump has actually gained ground in. And I said to myself, I know you're not bringing that up because I'm going to bring up Project 2025, right? I'm going to bring that up and I'm going to wonder your feelings about that, how supportive you are of that, and what kind of debilitating effect you think would have on African Americans and minorities in this country if everything about 2025, Project 2025 was embraced. What do you say to that?
Well, first off, everything about Project 2025, and I've got my Project 2025 mug right here in front of you. I'm drinking my Warpath coffee out of.
Oh, my goodness.
Project 2025, look, when President Trump went back to Mar-a-Lago, right, when the election was stolen, and he was thinking through about running in those really dark months of January, February, March of 2021. Two things happened. One was we started the precinct strategy, which was take over the Republican Party at the grassroots by individual activists, working class people and middle class people that had no political power, had never been engaged in process before. That was the political aspect of it. The intellectual part of it was that we know we needed, if we came back, not to have happen what happened in 16. In 16, we came from behind. We had very little time for transition. We didn't have a deep bench of people. So we needed a number of years to think through both policies and work through cadres that are working together. That's where you had America First Policy Institute under Brooks Rollins, who's Secretary of Agriculture. You had America First Law Institute under Stephen Miller, who's really the head of policy in the White House. You had conservative CPI under Meadows and DeMint. You had the OMB director, had CRA, Center for Renewing America, Russ Vought, which had Mark Paoletta and Jeff Clark. All these luminaries in the Trump second term had these think tanks. The Heritage Organization stepped in and kind of did an umbrella group to do it. Of course, President Trump, all of those policies are not President Trump's policies. There's various alternatives. The key to Project 2025, I think, if you look at it, is America First, national security, to really think about what's in the best interest of the United States and our citizens, and kind of economic populism, economic nationalism, what you're seeing now and what you dispute as the execution of really the economic war against the Chinese Communist Party. And so I understand there's a lot of debate about how this thing's being executed, but I think if you look at all of those think tanks combined in the policies, what we call days of thunder or flooding the zone, that every day President Trump is doing 7, 8, 9, 10 executive orders, executive actions, having heads of state come in. He's doing press availabilities. No one's ever seen a presidency like this. This is like FDR doing a fireside chat every day live and disintermediating the media so the cameras are right there and he's taking questions and answers. Why signing executive orders? Why taking executive action? This is why this presidency is so powerful. It has so much momentum. But that momentum was 4 years in the making to do this. And that's why Project 2025 and all of the policies, President Trump doesn't agree with them all. He's going to pick and choose which one he does believe in. And you're seeing it right now in his executive orders, and particularly in when you see this rapprochement, he's trying to work with Russia to pull him away from the Chinese Communist Party orbit, the peace he's trying to bring in the Middle East and in Ukraine, what he's trying to do with the Persians to make sure that we have a negotiated deal and not a bombing run over their nuclear facilities. And most important, the tariffs and the reorganization of the world's commercial relationships, putting America first, and most importantly, American citizens first. And this is why African Americans and Hispanics are going to come to our cause, because we're putting their economic interests first. We're not putting the easy money overlords on Wall Street or the global corporatist CEOs or the apartheid state of Silicon Valley and these oligarchs. We're putting their interests first. That's why people are rallying to our cause.
See, I think what you're saying, it sounds great. Here's the problem. For example, the whole DEI issue. I don't know if you heard what my opposition to the administration was on that issue. So I'll tell it to you right now. When people thought about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the words that I used was let DEI stand for didn't earn it. I could say the same thing about Pete Hegseth. Now, I'm not denigrating him in any way. He served this country. He was a damn good host on Fox News. I'm not trying to throw any shade on him whatsoever, Steve Bannon. I'm simply saying to go from the host of a weekend show on Fox News to being the Secretary of Defense for the United States of America, overseeing 3.5 million people. I think that's a bit of a stretch. So when they talked about DEI, and it always seemed attached.
Hang on.
Please.
You have been a sports commentator and a journalist and a sports reporter, etc. And it's not beyond the bounds of reason. Donald Trump was a real estate developer and a TV guy, had no government experience at all, no military experience. It is not beyond the bounds of probabilities that you could be the Democratic nominee for president of the United States, and you could be the president of the United States, if not in 2028, because it'll be Trump sometime in the future. So that Pete Hegseth didn't go by. We're living in an era you don't have to check the box. You don't have to go to be a mayor and a governor, and then you're eligible to be president of the United States. In fact, I would say the exact opposite right now. If you look at all these governors in the Democratic Party, I think they're at a disadvantage to people that actually have common sense, business sense, courage, conviction, and authenticity. And so I think putting something about people's previous, like Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard never had a role in intelligence. She's just doing an amazing job as DNI. So I think holding that against people is an old way of looking at things.
And that's why I'm trying to address you, because I'm not holding it against them. I'm saying what people were saying about DEI, that's what was being done to other people. In other words, you've got diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it automatically assume that if you're a minority, that's why you got that job. And ultimately, we've got to eradicate that stuff. As opposed to looking at your potential, the fact that there were roadblocks and impediment to your eventual success. And we have to overcome those things. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to throw any shade on Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, anything. I was just saying, by people's definition of it, the nerve of some folks to come and to look at something like DEI and not take into consideration why the necessity for it existed to begin with. Similar to me covering sports. You got a Rooney Rule. You got to interview minority candidates because owners weren't giving them interviews. When you have civil rights legislation. Why? Because there were so many impediments to the success or to the upliftment of minority communities in this country. We don't seem to be taking into account the roadblocks and the impediments to the American citizen's success that really provoke these policies being put into place to begin with. And I don't ever hear Steve Bannon and his ilk talking about that. That's my issue.
You hear about us talking about it all the time. We've done the most outreach from day one to say we're going to be a multi-ethnic, multi-party, and this is the way we build a coalition. This is why in the Rio Grande Valley, now, Starr County, Texas, which is the most Hispanic, it's a hard-bitten county down in the Rio Grande Valley, in South Texas, the most Hispanic community in the country, 97%. We lost to Hillary Clinton by 60 points in 2016. President Trump won by 16 points in 2024. Hispanics and African Americans are hearing our message of economic freedom, right? Of putting America first and of putting American citizens first. And we talk about the hard dollars and cents of bringing back manufacturing jobs and making those jobs available for everybody. This is the reason that the African American community, the biggest critics of the Democratic Party, the African American community, have realized that they've been lied to by big city politicians, by the Democratic machine. They've been taken advantage of. Look at the little headway they've made in these urban areas because Democratic politicians have been leeching off them for generation after generation after generation. They're finally said, "Hey,
Steve, why do you keep saying that?
We may not love Trump. We may not love everything Trump stands for." But we love the fact that Trump's going to give us a fair shot. DEI, by the way, DEI to me was a cultural Marxist endeavor and would have never done for the African American and Hispanic community what economic freedom is going to do for them.
All right, everybody, listen up. With all the big time sports action that's happening each and every day, the Stephen A. Smith Show wants to make sure you are taking advantage of it all. That's why we've partnered with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching sports. The app is really easy to use. To make a lineup, all you have to do is pick more or less on a few player stats. Choose from any of your favorite players, Luka Doncic, Jimmy Butler, and Zach LaVine, all in the same entry. Then sit back and watch. The list is absolutely endless. You can play Prize Picks in over 40 states, including California and Texas. Best of all, Prize Picks will give you $50 when you play your first $5 lineup. Win or lose, you'll get $50. Just use promo code SAS and download Prize Picks right now. Again, download the app and use code SAS to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So you're saying eradicating DEI is actually putting minority interests first? Is that your position?
Yes, eradicating DEI and getting back to a level playing field. Here's what they want to do. You want to get Hispanics and African Americans a shot. Take a shot at the apartheid oligarchs created by the Democratic Party, because that's where the money is, in Silicon Valley. We have elementary schools have been turned over to the STEM program. And why do we not have any African Americans and Hispanic? Hang on. Because they can't get into the engineering schools of computer science engineering. Why? Has nothing to do with IQ, has nothing to do with achievement, has nothing to do with native intelligence, has nothing to do with their drive, their grit and determination. It's a simple fact, because before I went to Harvard, I went to a land-grant university. In the engineering schools in my land-grant university is, 75 or 80% South Asian and Chinese. Why? Because their governments pay full freight on tuition. And the African Americans and Hispanics of my state still pay in-state tuition. So they're not there. And then Silicon Valley won't hire them. You know why? They're taking HB1 visas, which is a scam, and hiring young people coming out of India, right? At half the cost, and having them, sleep 8 to a condo in Silicon Valley, work as indentured servants, and blocking out African American Hispanic families. If we want to take on the oligarchs, let's take them on. If the African American community wants real economic freedom, let's talk on Wall Street, corporate America, and in Silicon Valley that has blocked them, and it's blocked them for their economic interests. DEI and all these social programs are not going to do it. We take down the oligarchs, and the African American community, particularly young men, understand this. That a guy like Trump ain't a politician. He's an armor-piercing shell.
He's
and
not.
What he's going to do is pierce. Excuse me?
He's not a politician. He's not. I got you on that. Exactly. And by the way, Steve Bannon, I got to tell you something right now. I think you've got me a little twisted, my man. Let me tell you something right now. I'm not here to defend the Democrats. Let's stop that right now. Let me eradicate that thought right now. So most of what you've said, I totally get you. And there's been tremendous damage done by the Democratic Party, particularly with African Americans in this country. I'm sick and tired of them riding that wave and riding just the mid-60s. But you're acting like the Republicans haven't done it.
They don't want your voice in this thing. And I can tell you why. I'll give you one data point. One of the first polls done that had your name, because I've been telling people for a while, I said, this guy's authentic. He's got convictions. He's tough. He's the type of candidate that the Trump era is going to see. I think the first poll had you at 7.5%. Now you see other polls coming out for Democratic, or 1%. I said, Stephen A. Smith's getting the treatment. Okay. Because the last thing they want, you are, brother. Hey, the last thing they want is you calling them out. Trust me, they got a closed shop. That closed shop has got people that'll line up and support them and support the billionaires that finance them in the credential class of a lot of Ivy League progressives, right? That run the deal that you see on MSNBC every night. And the last thing they want is a guy like Stephen A. Smith coming out and talking truth to power. So I've already seen how you're getting the treatment. How's a guy go from 7.5% to 1%? I'll tell you how. The poll is rigged. Okay. And you're going to get more of that treatment, because that apparatus they don't want anybody coming in and intruding on their game.
But Steve Bannon, fine. I actually agree with what you just said. I said it on Hannity last night. I thought that was a bunch of BS. I'm near 8% in the polls, and after being all over the news over the last month, suddenly I'm at 1%. I was born at night, not last night. I saw that a mile away. No problem there. My issue, however, is this. You keep saying them like the Democrats, like the GOP has been innocent in all of this. All of these years, when we point to a $37 trillion debt, when we talk about America not being prioritized in a litany of areas and what have you, the things that you pointed to, you act like it's just been the Dems. It's been the GOP too, wouldn't you say? Haven't they been guilty in this?
I've had a bigger beef with the Republicans than the Democrats. They've been controlled opposition. The country didn't get in this shape unless you had both parties working it, right? You had the neoliberal neocons, the globalists that set policy, and the Republican Party just went along with it. First off, you do understand the Republican Party hates Donald Trump. Now, to the degree that we've put MAGA in there, it's fine. But the traditional country club Republicans, they hate MAGA. They hate everything MAGA stands for. They hate Donald Trump. Hate, pure hate. This is why when the election was stolen in 2020, no establishment Republican stood up for him. When he went back to Mar-a-Lago, Fox did not, and Brother Hannity, they did not have Trump on live, I think, for almost 2 years. They were afraid he was going to talk about the stolen election. Everything had to be, they would take the rallies later, or they would do pre-recorded interviews. The Murdochs were all in for the governor of Florida and for Nikki Haley, right? And for Ron DeSantis, this entire crowd, Glenn Youngkin, everybody but Trump.
You mean the same network that had to spend $787 million for the Dominion voting thing? You mean that network? That's what you're saying? They were all in for somebody other than Trump?
Somebody other than Trump, 100%. They didn't really put up any fight they put up very little fight in going after the stealing of the campaign. Very little fight. And when Dominion came up after Murdoch was deposed, and you saw that he's lost his fastball. They didn't want him in an open court, getting eviscerated. That's why they settled for this huge number and essentially kicked Trump to the curb and the Trump movement to the curb. They tried to basically drive Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis on a town hall every other night on Fox in 2021 and 2022. President Trump was basically boycotted by Fox for any real coverage.
Steve Bannon, I'd be remiss in neglecting to bring this up because obviously you have a very influential voice in this country. A lot of people look at you. A lot of people trusted what you have to say. So let's just get right to it. In 2022, you were found guilty of contempt of Congress after refusing to comply with the subpoena to appear at a hearing of the United States House Select Committee on the January 6th attack and served a short prison sentence in 2024. When you look at your track record, okay, and what you've had to endure, okay, recently reaching a plea agreement, why should people trust what you have to say on this particular subject that they can follow your lead and everything will be all right? Why should they trust you, Steve Bannon?
By the way, I'm proud I went to prison. I went to prison as a political prisoner. I went to Danbury prison, been around 100 years. I think I'm the only misdemeanor in the history of Danbury. I am proud to go, and I didn't go to a camp. Danbury is an old school prison, quite dangerous. And one of the reasons it's dangerous because of the mass incarceration of young African-American and Hispanic young men on these RICO charges, conspiracy to distribute drugs, which they get 10, 15, 20, 25 years in a small place like Danbury, and they can't handle the time. And what they do is they turn to these drugs called K2 and others, and that totally flips them. These prisons are very dangerous. They're very overcrowded. I was proud to go to prison. I was proud to be an inmate. And the reason was I would do it again. The people that sent me to prison, Nancy Pelosi and the committee, Stephen A. Smith, they went and begged Biden. He didn't want to do it. They went on their bellies and begged Biden for blanket pardons that have never been done in the history of this country. Blanket undefined pardons. It's never been done. All the committee got them and all the staff got them. And why was that? Because the whole thing was a lying sham at the beginning. I stood up for the Constitution on separation of powers and also for the president to be able to talk to people and keep that confidential, right? On two purposes, I said, and I told my lawyers, let's just go all the way and try to do it. If they find me guilty in a rigged trial in Washington, D.C. with perjured testimony from a person who took a pardon, okay, I'll do it. I don't care. If I go to prison, I go to prison. I'm prepared to put it all forward here. And that's what people understand. That's why they come to my show. I don't care. And I tell people, hey, if they steal it again, we're going to go back to prison. I keep saying if they win the midterm elections, in the midterm, which traditionally kind of flips back and forth, if Hakeem Jeffries, who will raise $2 billion, if he wins, becomes Speaker of the House, because this is going to come down to after we lost the seats in Wisconsin on the Supreme Court ruling, it's going to come down to California and New York. And if we lose those seats, the first action Hakeem Jeffries is going to say is impanel, just like Pelosi did, going to impanel an impeachment committee and impeach President Trump. We're going to go right back to it. And if they steal 2028, the first thing they're going to demand is they're going to have all kind of lawfare again, just like the Justice Department had after us, and go after us again. And hey, if I go to prison again, I'll go to prison. I don't give a damn. I'm not going to back off 1 second. And I think that's why people come to the show, because they realize, hey, this guy puts it all on the line. He's not afraid of these guys. There's nothing. I'm 71 years old. They put me in prison when I'm 70. I don't give a damn. They can put me in prison the rest of my life. I'm not going to shut up, and I'm not going to stop fighting for my country.
You talked about being proud. Are you proud of the plea deal you reached when you admitted to the
100%,
New Yorkers who donated
100%. First off, think about it. They spent 7 years, millions of dollars. They basically had to rewrite the Constitution in New York to come after me again. They said I stole $22 million. At the end, it was about $50,000 to $75,000. I paid a legless, one-armed veteran, okay, so that he could work, right, on something for me. And when they did the deal, is because they couldn't get a conviction. Okay, we couldn't get total acquittal. Why? Because they went to Manhattan. They got the same type of Manhattan jury they got against Trump, right? These things are totally rigged. They signed, Steve, the thing I signed, by the way, had no penalty, no fine, no public service, nothing. The judge actually that signed it says, hey, I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen a deal like this. They realized that I could fight this thing and still get hung juries, but they told me, we're going to come after you and after you and after you. So I said, okay, fine, let's do it. I am proud. One of the proudest things I've done, including the Navy and working for Trump and doing this show, is building that wall in El Paso, Texas. If you saw the movie Sicario, you know how bad Juarez is and what happened. We built the wall right there to stop the cartels from trafficking women across it. I am so proud of that wall. And the people, they couldn't find a witness ever to come forward and say what Bannon and these guys did was wrong. So yes, I wear that with pride too. They've come after me to bankrupt me, to put me in prison. I cannot be defeated. And you know why? I don't quit. If you don't quit, you will beat them, because eventually they will fold.
Are you a nationalist?
100%. Yes, absolutely. Nationalist. Economic
in the world
nationalist.
that we're living in.
Yes, sir.
Hey, that's why I was going to ask that. I mean, some people, and I didn't want to say that. Some people have looked at that. They say Steve Bannon, and they say white national. I said, no, I'm not going to do that to him. I'm going to ask him the word nationalist, and I want him to describe himself as what he believes he is. So you say an economic nationalist. What exactly does that mean in this world of globalization where everybody's doing business with one another? And if you're on the outside looking in, it can compromise an economy in a lot of people's eyes. Explain
Stephen
that.
Stephen A., it's putting the country first and putting the citizens first. What's this economic war, as you described at the beginning of the show, about China and about tariffs and about non-tariff barriers, bringing back the 5 million manufacturing jobs that we lost over the last 20 or 30 years to China, to bring those manufacturing jobs back. Remember, New York City, your city, used to be a manufacturing powerhouse. And people say today, well, it can't be. That's not the second law of thermodynamics. There's no natural property that says manufacturing jobs can't be here in the United States. That's all done by human decisions, particularly by globalists, which is very simple. The capital wants to follow where the cheap labor is. And the cheap labor is the Lao Beijing of China, the working man and woman of China, what they call old hundred names. They work for essentially slave labor wages and slave labor conditions in filthy environments, because the Chinese Communist Party doesn't care. And more importantly, the lords of easy money on Wall Street don't care. The global corporations in the C-suite don't care. And the apartheid state of Silicon Valley don't care. They don't care what happens to those people, just like they don't care what happens to the working class and the middle class in this country, whether you're black, white, Asian, what's your ethnicity, what's your religion. They do not care. What they care is about their money and their power, and they got a rigged system to keep control. If you want to throw those chains off, you have to be an economic nationalist. And I'm proud of that. And here's what I'm most proud of: to see coming together the diverse crew we're putting together to have a 1932 type realignment. And I see Bernie Sanders and AOC running around the country, drawing huge crowds. Those people are thirsting for an answer. The Democratic Party abandoned working class people because they abandoned the policies that would bring jobs back. And you see Bernie Sanders, AOC.
Well, what did the GOP do?
Talking about
What did the GOP? Because you separate Trump. No, so hold on. You separate Trump from the GOP. That's why I'm asking. 100%. I know how you feel about the Dems. How do you feel about the GOP?
The GOP did nothing. The GOP are the same neoliberal neocons, invade everywhere and have huge tax cuts for the wealthy. This is what Trump brought to the table. This is in 2014. When I see Trump there, he's against all these other GOP politicians. He talked in another nomenclature. He talked in another vernacular. People leaned forward. This is not the traditional thing that's very thin without substance. Trump was talking about substance. And he's not a polished politician. He wasn't a politician at all, but people leaned into it. And that's the populism that we have brought to the Republican Party and took over the Republican Party. But I'll tell you, most elected officials behind closed doors are not pro-Trump, and they're certainly not pro our policies. This is why heads have exploded the last couple of days, including your good buddy, Sean Hannity, whose head blown up the most, about we are going to raise taxes on the wealthy. The tax bill that's there is being worked on right now does not extend the tax cuts to the upper bracket. It has a snapback. It goes from 37 back to probably 40% for the upper bracket, and maybe even something else for people that are millionaires. And Sean Hannity is having a total meltdown right now because that's not traditional Republican policies. This is what President Trump and this economic populism, this economic nationalism has brought into the Republican Party. And this is why we have people who are Democrats and independents, including so many young African Americans, are listening to Trump finally because he's talking in a different nomenclature and his policies are different.
You know what? You went off about billionaire Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. You called him close to an unmitigated disaster. But some would argue, because you don't like him in front of the camera because he doesn't seem to know what the hell he's saying in your eyes half the time. But some would argue it's because Trump's all over the place. And as a result, he doesn't know what to say from day to day. It's almost like I need to know this, Steve Bannon. Is there anything that Trump does wrong in your eyes? And if it is, if there is something, tell us what it is, because you seem to blame the GOP. You clearly blame the left. You even blame people that he's listening to, that he has speaking on his behalf. What do you find at fault with Donald Trump?
In this regard, with Howard Lutnick, I am not saying about his job as Commerce Secretary. My point is that we have to be very tight and on point about how we're rolling this thing out. And I think President Trump to date, because the whole concept of reciprocity and how he's rolled it out and escalatory ladder, which he is going up the escalatory ladder against China, I think it's been pretty much a close run thing. Has it been perfect? It has not been perfect because it's quite complicated. But you take what Bessent's doing, you take what Trade Representative Jamieson Greer is doing, you talk about the East Asian countries of Japan and South Korea and Taiwan and Vietnam, and throw in India are now stacked up, coming in to make deals like planes at LaGuardia on a Friday night. I think it's as close to as best as a close run thing as we get. Is it absolutely perfect? It's not. But these type of complicated negotiations, just like the Russians, they're never going to be perfect. Just like Reagan's was not perfect, just like Kissinger's to bring the Vietnam War to end were not perfect. They're not perfect. They're complicated deals with big personalities representing their countries as they should. So I think right now where we're positioned this is amazing, given that the Chinese Communist Party has been running an economic war with us for decades. And the elites on Wall Street, corporate America, and Silicon Valley, and the political class of Democrats and Republicans have stood by and let them ravage our nation and ravage the American people. And finally, Trump stood up, and we're in it now. We're engaged in it.
You called Tesla CEO and Mr. Doge himself, had Elon Musk. You've called him evil. Is there a new civil war brewing inside America in your estimation?
It's not a civil war. You do have, look, let's go back to the 1932 coalition, right? Remember, in 1932, FDR had Southern Klans members in the Democratic Party in the South who basically dominated. He had professors at Harvard. He had Wall Street tycoons. He had ranchers out west. The Democratic Party was a broad coalition that essentially governed this country really till Trump came along, even past Ronald Reagan, but really till Trump came along. That was for what, 50, 60, 70, 80 years? Because they put a broad coalition together. A lot of them hated each other and hated what each other stood for. President Trump's putting together a coalition. One of the newest aspects of that, Stephen A., is what we call these tech oligarchs or these tech bros. And they're more libertarian, but they support particularly in putting together a winning coalition. I think over the last couple of weeks, they've been a little shocked about what President Trump's done, particularly Mark Zuckerberg gave him $1 million, but then came in the Oval Office as a supplicant every day to say, please, whatever you do, call off this lawsuit. The lawsuit that Trump brought in his first term, but that one of the hidden jewels of the Democratic Party, Lena Khan, who is FTC, cleaned it up and brought it forward. And she, to me, is one of the best people about being an economic nationalist and a populist in this country, in the Democratic Party, that no Democrat, that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden didn't have her back at all. Now Zuckerberg failed. The trial started yesterday. Zuckerberg's going to have to testify. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to break up Facebook. We're trying to break up Meta. We're trying to take on the oligarchs. So yes, they're seeing that all the coziness they had with Trump, at the end of the day, look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk's financial sponsor is the Chinese Communist Party. That's who he's in business with, Tesla. President Trump could not be dropping bigger hammers. Everybody in the media is saying he's going to let Elon Musk cut so many deals and everything. He's going after Elon Musk's chief financial sponsor, and he's actually put a tariff that's going to be so prohibitive for Tesla. His board's telling him, hey, dude, you got to come back. You got to stop the Doge thing, and you got to come back. And it shouldn't be lost on you, Stephen A. Smith, that Elon Musk and Doge is a lot more prominent today than it was a month ago.
That is true. Can't deny that. Before I let you get on out of here, and man, I got to tell you, I disagree with a lot, but you're smart as hell. You know what the hell you're talking. You know what you want to say. I give you credit for that, Steve Bannon. I can't deny it. I got to ask you this though. Based on everything that you've said, essentially, that's what all of this comes down to in terms of 2028 and Trump getting a third term. You believe the only person that you can rely upon to deliver what your vision and what the MAGA vision is for this country is Donald Trump. You don't believe in anybody else in the GOP. That's what I'm peeling from all of this, Steve Bannon. To that, you say what?
Stephen A. Smith, I think they're very good people. J.D. Vance is a good man. You get so many good people. But for this time in history and what we have to do, look, it took us 40, 50, 60 years to get the country in this place. And the Republican Party had power as much as they didn't have power. This is both parties got us here. The Uniparty got us here. A guy like Trump, a leader, not a politician, is the guy getting us out. And my point is we got to play this hand out. We got to play this hand out. And yes, that's why I'm a firm believer in spending a lot of time on working through the issues regarding his running for a third term. But I will say, and I think you need to think about this for the nation. The Democratic Party because my family were Democrats. We're Kennedy Democrats. My dad, FDR, that's when he came up with the Great Depression. FDR was everything. My family, to think voting for Nixon was like incomprehensible. It was Ronald Reagan eventually, the Vietnam War and Ronald Reagan got my family only about a third of it. Still over 50% of the greater expanded, Bannon clan is still Democrats. So what President Trump, what the Democratic Party needs, because the Democratic Party of our parents and grandparents is gone, a service to the country would be people like yourself and others actually confronting that and getting into the race and actually putting forward common sense solutions for the nation thing. That's a debate on the left that needs to happen. And we're not going to get this thing sorted until you get a Democratic Party that's back to the roots that it had of actually listening to working class people and not this credential class, right? The credential class and the billionaires. You can't let the billionaires be the puppet masters. You can't let the credential class kind of run the deal. What it has to do is get back to its roots. And it's not going to get back to its roots unless it's confronted. Look, the fights we've had for years against the Republican Party, we've had our civil war. We're still having it. You guys have not.
Steve, I got listen, I'll address that in a second, but you're driving me nuts with this when you're bringing up the billionaires. Listen, I know that the left has been catering to elites and it was clear they forgot about the working class. Don't get me started with woke culture, cancel culture, identity politics, transgender, all of this stuff. Oh, don't get me started with that. I know that they're at fault for that. But I just saw Trump in the White House just the other day talking to billionaire friends about how much money they made in one day when he went on his Truth Social account and said this would be a good time to buy. So it ain't like this just the left talking to billionaires. He's doing it all the time. And by the way, isn't he one? Aren't those his contemporaries? Why are we acting like it's the left talking to the billionaires and forgetting about folks? But it can't possibly be him now that he's in office.
Stephen A. Smith, number one, he's the first. When Biden came to office on a stolen election, you had Schumer, you had Pelosi. The Democrats ran the deal, okay? Ran the entire deal. They put up a proposal, a tax proposal that would actually tax the wealthy tax billionaires. Brother, it never even got out of committee. They're totally performative and they're totally phony. The reason is the billionaires own the Democratic Party lock, stock, and barrel. Bernie Sanders runs around the country right now talking about the oligarchy. The oligarchy was created by the Democratic Party. All of those oligarchs, all of them were progressive Democrats until 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 5th of November when MAGA and President Trump won. And then they had their road to Damascus, their Damascene moment, the reality. Oh, all of a sudden, I think we're MAGA. I think we're tech bros. We really like Trump. Trump has got the biggest of them all, Zuckerberg, in court trying to break his empire up right now. Show me what every Democrat's done, including the phony Bernie Sanders who wanders around yammering. Bernie Sanders had 2 shots at the Clinton mafia, the neoliberal neocon apparatus in charge of the Democratic Party. 2 shots. He never laid a glove on him. Trump came in out of nowhere and politically ripped her face off and beat her in a general election against all odds when he was down as much as 10 or 12 points. Bernie Sanders is a phony. Bernie Sanders is a weakling. Bernie Sanders doesn't talk about any fundamental change. And that's because nobody in the Democratic Party, until you and a couple other guys come along, men and women come along, challenge the billionaires that own it.
I'll definitely challenge them. I ain't got no problems with that. I mean, I'll be right here, just like you have your own platform. I have mine to challenge them, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to challenge your side either. So let me throw this out there as a last question to you, Steve Bannon. And I really appreciate your time, by the way. Thank you so much for giving me your time. And like I said, I owe you. I return the favor anytime you ask. Here's my question to you. In your perfect world, from a policy perspective, a vision of America, how do blacks, how do Latinos, since you alluded to them earlier, how do they fit into this grand makeup of what America should be and may end up being down the road if your guy Donald Trump is in office or anybody else that you support for that matter? I want to give you an opportunity to paint a picture of what America would look like for people other than white males. Because we all know, I don't know if you know, I have this saying, when black folks catch a cold, I said, when white folks catch a cold, black folks catch pneumonia. It's always worse for us than it is for folks in white America. I always say that. So I don't want to be a hypocrite and not say that right here while you're on the airwaves. But if your vision, if this administration and beyond achieved what you want achieved for America, how does America look for the rest of us?
You know, I was raised in the north side of Richmond, which is a predominantly black section of Richmond. And when everybody ran in the 1960s and ran to the suburbs, my parents, we stayed. And the reason was it doesn't matter if you're black, whatever, you're a neighbor. And you see the hardworking folks there in that neighborhood. It's very simple. They're American citizens and they get a better deal than everybody else. This country comes first. Her citizens come first, regardless of your ethnicity, your race, your religion, any of it. And right now, that's the vision of Donald Trump, to put the country first. And in putting the country first, the American citizens get a preferred deal. Right now, the entire world system is on the shoulders of the working class and middle class in this country. The full faith and credit of the entire system, of the $36 trillion and the $100 trillion contingent liabilities. It's not the Federal Reserve. It's not the SEC. It's not the great banks on Wall Street. It's not a handful, the political class. It's the American working class and the middle class, the full faith and credit. The entire apparatus, world security, the 2 battle groups in the Red Sea right now, those 2 carrier battle groups are made up. The 24,000 sailors there are working class sons and daughters of American citizens. It's quite simple. Put this country first, at the same time, put the citizens first. All they're asking for, the citizens in our country are not asking for a handout. All they want's a piece of the action. And it's upon us to deliver that for them. If we give them a piece of the action and actually turn a capitalist system that has very few capitalists in it to actually bring them into the capitalist system with ownership of real assets and ownership of financial assets, and understand in their own country they don't have to compete against foreign labor in the soil that for generation after generation their families have fought and died for and built these communities. That's the sunlit uplands. Once we deliver that, this country is going to be on the right track. And that's why I support having Trump around as long as possible, because he is an armor-piercing shell to the elites that rule this country.
2 terms, not any more than that, sir, the 22nd Amendment, but I hear you loud and clear. I want to thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Can't thank you enough. And I'm extending an invite down the road because we know midterms are coming up and all of that stuff. And I wanted you to know that you're welcome back on. I really, really appreciate your candor, your thoughtfulness and what have you. I don't agree with everything. You know that, but I hear where you're coming from, and I thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come on the show for so long. I really appreciate it.
I thank you.
Take care of yourself,
you too. Right? And you've got a duty to your country, just like Trump knew he had a duty to his country. Stephen A. Smith, thank you for having me on. Look forward to coming back.
All right. All right. Take care.
And this is what you get for it from the Democrats. You get nobody.
Introducing the Ungun, the non-lethal self-defense platform. Lightweight and simple to use. It uses an